I'm curious. HighGuard should never have been released. It was destined to fail, chat. This was destined to fail. I'm curious. I'm super curious.
HighGuard isn't dead yet, but it will be soon. It's going to limp on for just over a month, and then servers will be switched off. Now, this is a fate many of us saw coming, but why did it go down this way precisely? Did it really have to happen? Because a decade or more ago, maybe it wouldn't have. You see, HighGuard has just become the latest example of a way in which the game industry is rather broken. There's a whole dimension behind this story that most people haven't really heard of. And it's an industry where the only way to survive is increasingly to be a massive hit right off the bat, enough to convince the people holding the purse strings that you are worth keeping alive. Today, we'll be talking about HighGuard, but not long ago, we talked about a big new game from Riot Games, which also got the same treatment. It's 4 years of funding and work.
I'm gonna be honest with you, I never even knew this game even came out, to be honest, because the last time I heard about the 2XKO thing, I thought it was in beta. That's why. So that's what I heard. It was like in closed beta the last time I heard about it. I didn't see any advertisement about it.
Going into a single roll of the dice, where really, this just may as well be gambling. Despite the memes, HighGuard is not Concord. 2 million people actually played HighGuard. That's quite wild, but that's the stats that we're getting. And statistically, it means some of you were probably among those 2 million people. And I'd say just about none of you could be convinced to play Concord. Maybe because you would have had to have bought it first. According to the game's director, most people played this on PS5. 92% were engaged enough to complete the tutorial. The average session duration sat around 91 minutes across 3.5 matches, and while some claimed the game would be better as 5v5, per playtime, most people stuck with 3v3. And from what we understand, the people who stayed with the game actually liked it. You can even see that in Steam reviews once you start looking at the number of ones past a certain playtime. So there's something in HighGuard that did resonate. But obviously, there's a hell of a lot that didn't. But when your funding depends on how many of those people stay immediately at launch, and then your launch pulls in an audience that was not pre-sold on the pitch of the game, then 2 million players in a few days really stops sounding like a win, and new reports suggest it may have helped kill the game. Bloomberg's Jason Schreier spoke to former Wildlight Entertainment staff, and boy, we've learned a lot from this. Tencent pulled financial support from HighGuard only 2 weeks after the launch, and staff were left with the impression that their financing was contingent on hitting certain metrics, specifically retention rate. And they had not came close to hitting that retention rate. And what that means is that after 4 years of funding a project, Tencent wouldn't even give a fraction of that time into trying to support it once it was live. And here's how we essentially got there. Wildlight's team quit Respawn Entertainment in the wake of Apex Legends' success, and they did so with promises of better profit sharing in future victories, because basically Apex was a big hit and they didn't really feel like the benefits of that trickled down to the actual people making the game. Now, they built HighGuard in 2 years. They salvaged parts from a survival base builder that they'd shelved in 2021. And just like Titanfall, this would be a multiplayer game that could lead, eventually, to single-player efforts. They were apparently quite hyped about that. And just like so many other games from the early 2020s, they had funding from, amongst others, Tencent. Now, they were still an independent studio. They had freedom to build. That is, of course, just where their funding was coming from. That could mean the likes of, say, equity investment, but that still would have them being independent if they were still running their own company, which they were. Testing internally and externally on this game had led to optimistic feelings amongst staff, but looking back, they say they can see the blind spots.
That's the craziest thing about it. So they did a lot of internal testing, right? But then like they found like the actual problems or so, and they recommended to have a beta, but then they were shot down because the higher ups literally straight up in HighGuard had massive egos because they were trying to copy Apex Legends success where they shadow dropped it immediately during that time many years ago.
Pretty sure you and I can both guess what those were. They didn't test with players who weren't already bought into the pitch of their game.
Exactly.
Which does seem like a fairly fundamental error, but when you think about how this game is actually played, how reliant it is on communications, you can see how that could feed back into the design of the game.
So HighGuard was a complicated game and to learn, and was more fun when using voice chat to communicate with other players. When they tested it with the microphones off, it made for a much worse experience. Former Wildlight employees said having developers on a hand to answer questions and explain mechanics also led to the different conditions than players would ultimately face when the game was released into the wild.
and lead to serious oversights. But even though that is an issue, there is in a way a bit of a solution for it, and that is to only draw in players who are best suited to like a game like HighGuard. Now, their plan was to do a shadow drop targeted at that audience, targeted at the people who really are into a game like that game. So an Apex Legends like launch, but leadership said that they never needed a, quote, Apex level of success to survive. The game director put things rather simply. Here's the quote: "When you're out of time and money, you have to release a game with the runway you have available and hope players will stick with you post-launch." This is kind of like a car crash in slow motion.
But you had so many years of development, though, to make the game during the cooking time process. Like, what were you guys doing? Just fiddling with your thumbs or something like that? That's a question to ask, you know?
You can see all the different contributing factors, all kind of careening towards each other. With Game Awards and all the ways in which this game ended up being brought to market, they ended up attracting way more people than the people who are like the people they tested the game on. And while it drove numbers that an indie could only dream of, it may have ended up doing more harm than good, because the launch flooded the game with players who had not been pre-sold on the pitch. People who found out about HighGuard not because they saw a streamer play it and thought it looked cool, or had a trailer resonate with them, but in many ways, you know, people who saw the largest drama going on in the gaming space at the time and thought, come on, how can I not check out this almighty disaster? Which may not have been good for this game's retention numbers. And as it turns out, those numbers were pretty damn important. Let's just use the Steam concurrent data. So HighGuard lost 60% of its players from day 1 to day 2. Of course, this is based on just concurrency, so it's not literally them losing players, but it's the best number we got. We could say that's a 40% retention rate. By day 7, that is down to 13%. And to really drive that home, do you know which game has better retention than HighGuard? Technically, Quantic Dream's MOBA, Spellcaster's Chronicles. Though admittedly, it's doing that from a peak of 888 concurrent players, which really isn't that great. Now, Tencent also do want high player numbers. They're not going to make decisions based purely on a retention percentage dropping. But retention and conversion, that means players turning into payers, is one marker that they will use to work out if an investment is still worthwhile. For a multiplayer game, those are the very first signs of whether it is going to work fundamentally. Now, Tencent promised funding for post-launch support as long as it met certain metrics. Day 1, day 7, day 30. If the trend isn't good, then there's a problem. Quite obviously, Tencent did not see good metrics and therefore walked away. And that's because they're not acting as a publisher here, not a traditional publisher. They are acting as financial speculators. It's a little bit different. HighGuard and Wild...
Financial speculators? That's interesting. So, was there like a contract or so for this specifically, or was it like, you know...
Light are not a game and a studio to backers like Tencent. What they are financial instruments. The value of Tencent's investment may go up and down as well. Wildlight are just one of the many studios Tencent has invested in over the last half-decade. They're basically making a widespread of bets, playing the odds that one or a few will return enough to cover all of the losses. They are bets, but they are considered bets. In this case, Tencent backed Wildlight because it's the team that made Apex Legends, so hey, maybe they could do it again. But even with that counting in their favor, maybe making the betting odds a little bit better than average, it still is a gamble. Things can still go wrong. You can have a launch that doesn't fully work. And that's the real problem here. You see, Tencent are not the ones actually taking a risk here. Not really. You see, the money that they've spent gets written off as a bad investment that maybe gives them a nice little tax break. At worst, they cover the loss with their endless volume of successful games. They can literally just walk away in a clean and easy fashion. But for the developers, it's not so easy, because they're the people who actually did, at some stage, believe in this game. Now, what we're seeing with Wildlight's 20 remaining staff is that they've just shipped a whole skill system and progression in response to launch complaints.
Wait, what? Level up your account and build your warden with powerful new abilities, passives, and upgrades? They added a skill tree into this game? But why? Wait, what? Why? Raiders, treasure hunters, protectors, and harvesters. This has to be definitely like a scrap mechanic or so that they had for the survival game that they initially were making. That's what I feel like this is.
So what we see is that actually work was being done. They were trying to do things to turn it around. Those are pretty big changes, but the people holding the purse strings aren't interested. They don't care enough to try and salvage something from it. So it is just 4 years of work completely wasted. There's no chance of a recovery like...
Yeah, it's 4 years of work or so. But the question is like, you know, because usually these systems and metrics and everything take a while to make or so for them to be implemented into the game. So my curiosity is if they made this shit like in that 4-year development cycle, but instead of like putting it all together all at once, they kind of like drip feed you through the entire year, because they had a fucking roadmap and everything, right? But the roadmap was pretty shit though, I'm gonna be honest with you, because like every month or so, like every like what 2 to 3 months you get a new map or so, and it's just kind of like, that's not gonna be very good, you know?
Say Fortnite or Rainbow Six Siege, both games that, yeah, ended up being super successful, but had fairly scuffed launches. And that's because Tencent doesn't want to invest money into the best game possible. They want to make the most money possible, and those things are not always the same thing. Their victory condition is a lot less aligned with you or I or developers than it would be for many other game publishing arrangements in the industry. And the funny thing here is that HighGuard is not even the worst example. This is going on at an alarming rate. Now, we talked about NetEase last year, where they killed half a dozen game studios before they could even release a title. Actually, just as I'm recording this video, there's a big breaking story about funding being pulled from the Like a Dragon dude studio, I believe. And just a few weeks ago, when...
This is really sad, or so I heard about this. I actually did hear about this, that they pulled funding or so for this game in general. I was pretty excited for this game. This game piques my interest.
Whenever 2XKO launched, Riot immediately cut the team whenever the first indicators didn't really look that good. There's other examples. Ubisoft cancelled XDefiant over, I think, more it having a very costly dev team than maybe quality concerns. But basically, there will always be a reason to end these games sooner, rather than commit more resources for the chance of solid returns later. But you may wonder, does it have to be this way? Are there counterexamples? You ever heard of a...
When it became to XDefiant or so, I liked the first closed beta of XDefiant a lot more than the actual final release. I don't know what they did or so, or what they changed. Well, I know what they changed or so, but like, they should have not changed at least a good chunk of the stuff or so. But I like the closed beta way more compared to the final release.
A little game called Among Us. The Among Us developer Innersloth opened Outer Sloth as a publishing arm in 2024. They funded more than 24 games, usually for smaller devs, and they use a traditional recoup model. Put up the funding, and then take a chunk of the profits until you've made your funding back. And they're not alone. Palworld dev Pocket Pair's publishing arm, say that a few times fast, told Aftermath, quote, "We don't necessarily need to recoup our money ASAP. That's why we can have these more generous terms." And that's actually the thing. A lot of times, games may hit recoup after a year, and it basically is fine, even if it is not a super fast success. And then there's Hooded Horse, who go further than just about anyone in this industry. They've drawn acclaim not just for publishing good games, but also for making sure their developers can actually survive those games. Their contracts include a straight revenue split of 65% to the dev from day one. That is almost unheard of, and their plan simply is to make their money back on the 35% cut over time. Now, with all those good-sounding publishers I mentioned, there is still a desire to make a profit, just like with Tencent. These publishers are putting up money, they would like a return. But the difference with these smaller groups with smaller funding pots is that they see games as projects worth backing made by actual people. Tencent, meanwhile, is looking at so much money and so many projects that games like HighGuard simply don't matter. Because ultimately the thing that they're investing in is just a financial instrument to get a return. You don't have the same, I guess, mission-driven publishing that you have with some of the new wave of really good indie publishers. And that's one reason why HighGuard and Wildlight may as well just be a lottery ticket to be discarded once it has been scratched. The Outer Sloth founder, Forrest Willard, sums all of this up quite well in an interview he gave to Aftermath. It's one where he talks about signing one-button bosses. Right, here's the quote. "They made me feel like, regardless of whether their game did well or not, they would continue making games. Their passion was behind it, and I just wanted to give them that chance. Maybe HighGuard was never going to work, but nobody got to find out. I think there may have been a future where a trimmed down team maybe could have sustained itself, maybe for long enough for the game to really get into a groove, for them to find a version of it that actually resonates with whatever its target market would end up being. But we never got to find that out, because 2 weeks of data was enough to kill 4 years of work.
That's
it's
crazy.
just one example. We literally just saw the same with Riot's 2XKO. And maybe with 2XKO, it hits even harder, because the game itself is considered to be masterful in many ways, to actually be fantastic. So even when the game is good, but just maybe needs a little bit of work in some things to actually sort of spread and get those higher player numbers, even in a case where the core thing you really know is good, that's still not enough. That's just the increasingly
But isn't also like, because it's owned by Riot, right? But isn't Riot like also well known as being like very predatory with their skins and everything like that? I wonder if that's also plays a factor too, because of what, Valorant and fucking League of Legends.
Sink or swim games industry that we are in today, and I don't like it. I don't think it's good for us. I don't think it's good for devs. I don't think it's good for games. But at least for now, on the big scales, it's the only one that we've got. We just have to be thankful that in the indie spaces, there are a small number of really good new publishers actually changing shit up. But there's a lot of shit publishers too, and well, let's just hope that they go bust and stop harming video games. That's only one way games are being harmed. Do you know what the other one is? Fake bullshit that actually made its way onto Metacritic. This next story is absolutely insane. It involves
What an interesting
corporate
piece,
entities
actually.
gobbling
That's
up
very
websites that
interesting.
you've heard of,
It was
gutting the
actually
staff,
destined to
replacing them with
fail.
bots. It's a whole crazy thing. You can learn about it in this video next.
It was destined to fail, dude. That's kind of crazy, though. I'm gonna be honest with you. Live service is quickly becoming dead service. Remember when you could just buy a game, host a server, and it couldn't get shut down because reasons to have nothing to do with the customers? The reason people stuck with the 3v3 was because match finding was getting slow and difficult. Yeah, for 5v5 when the numbers were pretty small. Yeah. $0.10 of funding simply is not enough. HighGuard lived for approximately 3.75 Concords. Jesus Christ. Yeah, adding player progression after the announcing of the terminal shutdown day for a while is a wild choice. That's the thing itself. Like, they added a skill tree to this game. I was just kind of like, wait, they added a skill tree to this game? But like, why though? That was the one thing that like kind of like was like, what? That was the thing that they did in this game? Even though like the game is shutting down and everything, I just feel like they definitely had like a lot more content initially. They definitely did. This here specifically was like, they added this? I feel like definitely they were holding back a lot of the content in general. Either it wasn't like done or so. Like, it just felt like it was pretty bare bones when the game came out. Like, that's the problem. That's the same thing with Marathon too. It just feels very bare bones, you know? I guess it was a Hail Mary to end of service, but I feel like some of these systems were probably like almost done to close to done, but they needed just a little bit more time. But then, you know, they just need a little bit more, you know, they wanted to announce the game later or so, but I assume they wanted to ship the game out as early as possible to meet the quarter financial, you know, the financial thing at the end of the day, you know, for the first quarter. So that's what I'm thinking. I was like, you added all of this shit like after, and your game is already ending in general. Why didn't you just added this initially? You know, that's why I'm always saying is like, a lot of these games in general like are just feel like they're just half baked. That's what Marathon feels. That's what HighGuard feels as well. So it's just kind of like, I don't know, man. It's like, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Well, Question is if we'll ever get any more interviews from the devs behind the scenes. Is my curiosity, because we did had like more like tidbits and stuff and whatnot that was like leaked out or so about Concord in general. And now I'm curious to see if we'll get something like that. So, but it's very interesting though. Never even noticed that they added all of this stuff in general for at the very end. Apparently, Asmongold is going to be playing it when it shuts down. I don't know about me, yours truly. To be frankly honest, I probably won't be doing that. But yeah.